From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hi, good morning. How's everybody doing? Great. All right, thank you all so much for coming. It's a pleasure to host you. I'm Guha Shankar. I'm one of the folklorists here on staff at the American Folklife Center, the Library of Congress. I wanted to thank everybody who's made it here today, colleagues from near and afar, especially you folks. We know you have a long journey in terms of where your communities are and where you want your communities to go. We're here to help you get as far down that road as we possibly can here at the library. In just a few minutes, I'm going to turn it over to Betsy Peterson, my chief, who's going to welcome you to the library officially. So this is the off-the-cuff remarks over here. A couple of housekeeping announcements. There is some coffee back there, thanks to Rachel and Kara and other folks from NMNH. So help yourselves. This side coffee, that side collections. Just that's a dividing line, right? So thank you. All right, well, welcome again to the Library of Congress. I'm really glad that you all are here. You're going to hear some exciting presentations, and we believe we've achieved critical mass in terms of participants. There may be some few stragglers here and there, but I'm sure that's part of your homework. You will fill them in on what happened this morning, including the visit to the bowels of the Jefferson Building for some of you and the lovely electrical closet. I can take you around later on if you want to. Okay. And so let me turn it over right now to my director, Betsy Peterson, from the American Folklife Center.
I think your journey was made much longer this morning by the commute, but welcome to Washington, D.C. It wouldn't be an authentic experience without an adventure on the metro. So, as Guha said, my name is Betsy Peterson. I'm the director of the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress. And on behalf of the librarian, Dr. Carla Hayden, I want to welcome you all here and welcome all participants to the 2017 Breath of Life Archival Institute for Indigenous Languages. Thank you for all of the efforts you make to revitalize and sustain the cultural heritage traditions of your home communities. We at the library are deeply honored to be working with you in this preservation and access effort. I know you will have many appointments over the next week to 10 days at other archival facilities throughout Washington, D.C., and very shortly you're going to learn a lot more about the library's research centers and the resources that we have housed here. But I thought it would be interesting for you to keep in mind a couple of things about the library to give you a little bit of context and a little bit of context about the collections here. That our acquisitions and collection management policies, quote, cover virtually every discipline and field of study and include the entire range of different forms of publications and media for recording and storing knowledge. We are a library and aspire to be a library that holds the breadth of human knowledge here around us. So what does that mean in real numbers? Well, as of 2016, the library collections numbered 164 million items. And when I say items, I mean we collect and preserve a wide and comprehensive range of formats. So, for instance, this list includes more than 38.6 million catalog books and other print materials in 470 languages, many of which are from indigenous communities around the world, and more than 70 million manuscripts. We also have the largest rare book collection in North America, and the world's largest collection of legal materials, films, maps, sheet music, and sound recordings. And since we are on this topic of oldest and rarest and biggest, I did want to mention that the American Folklife Center, which has nearly 6 million items, also houses the world's largest, oldest surviving recordings of Native peoples. And that being of the anthropologist Jesse Walter Fuchs, wax cylinders of the Passamaquoddy community of Maine, whom he recorded in 1890. We have several thousand such cylinders, not to mention other ancient technologies. And over the last couple of years, using cutting-edge digital sound capture and restoration tools, we are transferring, and in some cases, retransferring some of this fragile media, cylinders, instantaneous discs, paper, to today's digital formats. And in the case of the Passamaquoddy, we are working with the tribe to acquire culturally based information and descriptions about the songs and stories that were recorded so long ago for the LC's catalog records. This is an ongoing project, and we are already hearing about some exciting linguistic and cultural discoveries the Passamaquoddy community has made since they began listening to the recordings a few months ago, and it's been very exciting to watch and engage in all of this. I mention this project, however, because a few of the language groups who are represented here will be listening to materials at the AFC reading room, which is on the other side of this building on this floor. And you will be listening to materials that are just a few years younger than the 1890 Passamaquoddy materials. Judith Gray, our head of reference, our head wrangler, our head, I don't know, font of wisdom in chief. She will be in the reading room helping you, and please corner her, talk to her. She is a wealth of knowledge about the collections that we have. She's an incredible resource for you all. So now I'm going to turn over the program to the folks who can really tell you much more about the collections that are here and that we hope you will use and engage with. We have with us today Barbara Baer from the Manuscripts Division, and Barbara Natanson and Catherine Blood from Prints and Photographs, Jay Sweeney, head of the Humanities and Social Science Division, and Carla Davis Castro from the Law Library, and of course Judith Gray from the American Folklife Center. And sincere thanks to all of these folks for being part of this program and for bringing some of the materials for you all to see. But importantly, I also want to express deep appreciation to the Breath of Life Institute staff and our colleagues, Gabriela Perez Baez, Daryl Baldwin, Rachel Vogel, and especially a guiding light, Dr. Leon Hinton, the founding vision behind the BOL Institute. We've enjoyed our participation in all of the institutes for several years, and we look forward to many more and to a continued collaboration with all of you. You are welcome anytime here. And on that note, I will thank you all again and turn everything over to Jay Sweeney to begin the rest of the day. Jay.
Well, thank you, and good morning, and welcome to the Library of Congress. My hope in the few minutes that we have together is to demystify using the library. You've heard of the 164 million items in the collections. How do you get started? And so I wanted to share a few things with you as you look to get started. But something to remember, perhaps as you go about the course of your research, especially when you're here at the library, is try to discern what can you only do here at the Library of Congress. There are offerings that we have on the website, digital offerings. Those things, when you return home, you can view and pursue. But what we're trying to do is help you focus on what you can only do here to optimize your time. I represent a division that it's best represented by the main reading room. It's just upstairs. To go to the main reading room, all you need is a reader registration card, a card that if you haven't already obtained, you can do so across to the main reading room upstairs on the first floor, but you'll need the card to go into the reading room. We'll talk about the importance of the card in a moment in requesting materials. But upstairs also is our Microform and electronic resource area. The library has invested much resources in purchasing electronic databases, and some of these may be helpful in your research. Again, online offerings, but again, our focus here will be on how we can help you. Probably what the greatest clues that we can share with you is involve the reference staff in your research. you'll probably never know what you miss without involving the reference librarians. There are collections that are not obvious, that are not in the catalog, clues that our reference staff can provide you on locating materials here at the library. Also, if you find yourself not knowing where to go, and you'll hear much about different collections, different areas of the library. These areas may be very relevant for you, but if you're confused about where to go, again, you can come to the main reading room. Our reference librarians are also expert in the resources here of the library to be able to point you to the area of the library holding those collections. So again, a first stop may be going upstairs to our main reading room to have a conversation with our librarians. One of the key resources that organizes materials at the library's Many Nations. This was published about 20 years ago, but is very valuable in helping to organize the various Indigenous collections here at the library. Many Nations goes through the various reading rooms, what's in the general collections and the various specialty collections. We have copies of this in the main reading room, and I hope you've had a chance to browse this. As you talk to our reference staff, again, we can be very helpful in orienting you to the library. The library is a closed-stack library, meaning that you'll have to identify what you're looking for and make a request for it, and it's brought out to you in the reading room. So it involves a search to identify what's needed. We can help you with the subject headings. This will vary. Sometimes they're not the obvious. And they have changed over years. And so we can help you identify what is the controlled vocabulary, say for a community or for subheadings to search further. Of course, searching our periodical literature and also to navigate subscription databases. But also, what might be helpful is our reference specialists have specialization in many areas and can work with you. Bibliographies and guides, other materials that, again, may not be in the online catalog and findable in, say, a cursory search. One of the fortes of the library is having collected materials through the history of this country, particularly reports, publications, the Bureau of American Ethnology, for example, and a variety of subject areas that you might find useful, very multidisciplinary. For example, just to identify publications that may not be obvious, being familiar with the American Bureau of American Ethnology, the annual report, for example, is the index is up in our main reading room. Being able to identify specific studies, research that has been done. This, for example, focuses on the Catawba Indians and specialized studies that might be relevant. One of the advantages of searching here at the library is that many of the older publications you're looking in print form, not a microfilm. And that is advantage of being here at the library. We do have web resources that, again, will help you and guide you generally. But again, for your specific searching, please involve the reference librarians. A word about our Microform reading room, again, which is upstairs. What is very helpful is to tap into the research of others. And the Library of Congress has a almost comprehensive collection of U.S. doctoral dissertations, thanks in great part to University of Microfilm and the relationship that the library has had for many years. Being able to tap into the research of other scholars might be very helpful in pursuing your own research. Early state records, pamphlets, American history, British manuscripts projects, also oral history collections. Again, items that will not be evident in the library's online catalog. And again, throwing out a few keywords here, just perhaps as clues to know what to ask the reference librarians. Now, we don't have time to go into detail as far as searching the online catalog, other than to say our reference librarians are experts and can work with you as regarding the various aspects of searching. The best and most efficient way is subject headings. And to the subject headings, both online and working with our staff, these are some examples. Usually most specific is searching by the community, and then under which you'll find many subheadings. For example, just as an example here, the Chumash language, you'll find subdivisions by geography and also the type of material. So we have here Southern California, conversation and phrase books, dictionaries, bilingual materials. But I also mentioned that we do have, that will not be individually cataloged, materials that are part of what we call a lesser known language collection, meaning that they're cataloged collection level by language, and they consist of boxes that simply contain materials that have been gathered together on a specific language. These may be hymnals, pamphlets, translations, and so they're held off-site, but talk to our reference librarians about, again, these collection level unknown, lesser known language collection to see examples. No appointment is necessary to search in the main reading room. Simply present yourself during our hours of operation. Searching further, this is just an example of a publication that came up using that subject heading. How do you request the item? You're able to click on that link, request the item. It will give you the call number, and you're able to request in a reading room. Now, the advantage of having a researcher's card is that you're able to, once you register, you're able to establish an account. And then you're able to go in and request materials even off-site in anticipation of your looking at this here at the library. So if you haven't already received, please obtain a researcher's card. And then, you can establish an account. And then as you're browsing the online catalog, you're able to request these materials. So as you go back to your hotel and whatnot, being able to search what's relevant, what might be helpful, and then go ahead and request those materials. Materials in this building take about 45 minutes to an hour. If they're in another building, probably double that time. Some materials are held off-site. We run out of space here on Capitol Hill. And so some materials are held off-site. So you're looking probably a 24, 48 hour. The librarians, again, can help you, say, manage time as far as these requests, but it's very helpful knowing what you're looking for and being able to make these requests and then plan for your visit when you return to the library. You may have questions, and those perhaps if you don't ask here and you return home to your communities and ask, we have Ask a Librarian. That you're able to ask us follow-up questions. We're not able to independently undertake your research, but we can give you search strategies, help you identify what's here at the library, where you may need to go outside the library. But a reference specialist can guide you through Ask a Librarian. But that's our basic search. If you have questions, I have my email there, jswe@loc.gov. But again, please visit us in our main reading room so we can work with you individually. Now to continue, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Barbara Baer from the Manuscript Division.
I want to add my welcome to the ones from Betsy and Jay. We're so pleased to have you here at the Library of Congress. I hope all of you have a very fruitful time doing your research in Washington, D.C. The Manuscript Division is just one of several special collections divisions of the Library of Congress that have their own reading rooms to serve certain formats of primary materials. In the Manuscript Division overall, we have some 63 million items in nearly 12,000 collections. The collections are mostly made up of personal papers and some records of organizations. They mainly contain handwritten or typed correspondence, journals and diaries, account books, scrapbooks, drafts, and other types of writings or records, such as field notes. You can find out more about conducting research in the Manuscript Division by going online to the Manuscript Division webpage, which you see on the screen, which is within the Library of Congress loc.gov portal. Most of our finding aids or registers for the larger collections are available online through that Manuscript Division website. And it's a good idea to plan your research in advance by looking at the finding aids and jotting down what boxes or microfilm reels you may want to look at. Keep in mind that some of our collections are stored off-site, and you may need to place an order in advance of your visit. All you need to do is go to that Manuscript Division website, call the number, and let the librarian who answers the phone know that you're coming, and they can let you know if it's on-site or off-site. And there's also the listing on the website that you can check for yourself. For preservation reasons, the Manuscript Division requires that if a collection has been microfilmed or digitized, you must use the microfilm or digital version for your research, even when you are here on site in Washington, D.C. Exceptions can sometimes be made for viewing physical items through consultation with a collection curator or specialist. When looking for first language evidence, it may be difficult to drill down to find specific materials you may want to pursue. You also need to be prepared that we may have little or nothing by way of documentation, depending on which particular tribal heritages and language groups you are studying. We actively seek to acquire new collections that can help fill the many gaps in linguistic evidence for different tribal groups and subgroups, and update older materials in our collections. At the same time, we honor tribal libraries and archives and encourage those working on language reclamation and revitalization to document and preserve locally and regionally. For our purposes today, I'm going to highlight some examples from manuscript collections that deal specifically with ethnology, language and linguistics, vocabularies, and materials in translation. The Manuscript Division has many materials pertaining to Native American history, particularly in the period stemming from European colonization to the early 20th century. The division has First Voices materials, but the bulk of materials are filtered through non-Indigenous speakers. Almost all the materials originate from incidents of syncretic encounter. Examples include Bibles and prayer books translated by missionaries or school teachers, such as this 18th century Micmac prayer book, which was written in hieroglyphics and which was purchased by the Library of Congress as a single item in 1907. There are records from religious and educational institutions, such as this Aleut primer from 1846, with the alphabet in Aleut, Russian, and Church Slavonic, from our Russian Orthodox Greek Catholic Church of America, Diocese of Alaska collection. These records stem from 1733 to 1938 and are available on microfilm. The collection includes documentation of the administration of Indian schools in Alaska, photographs, and Aleutian translations of the Gospels. You should also look for early printed translations of Christian religious texts into Indian languages that are available in the Rare Book and Special Collections Division. Accounts of explorations, expeditions, and trade routes in the Manuscript Division can include vocabulary lists and other linguistic evidence. An example is this vocabulary from Joseph Ingraham's 1790 to 1792 journal of the journey of the ship Hope from New England to the Pacific Northwest, Washington Isles, and Nootka Sound. So it has a combination of Upper Native American and First Nation material in it. The Ingraham Journal has been published, and it is also online through the World Digital Library, which you can also find through the Library of Congress website. The Manuscript Division's Henry Rowe Schoolcraft papers include 25,000 items. Among these are writings of the Chippewa poet and writer Jane Johnston Schoolcraft, who lived from 1800 to 1842, and the field work that was conducted by the members of her Johnston family. The Johnstons were instrumental in providing the personal and social connections for gathering cultural field notes, for preparing Chippewa grammars, and for the translation of oral history, legends, and tales that exist in primary format in that collection. Their fieldwork provided the foundation of the published work of Henry Rose Schoolcraft, Jane Johnston's husband, who was the ethnologist and Indian agent in Michigan Territory, and of the literary magazine that the Schoolcrafts produced together in the 1820s. And we have the magazine in rough draft within the Schoolcraft papers. The collection also includes some indigenous vocabularies from non-Chippewa sources, including some Mandan material and notes on the Kushna tribe of the South Yuba River near Sacramento, above Sacramento in California. The Schoolcraft collection is available on microfilm. It is also offered as a documentary electronic resource through the Gale Group's Indigenous Peoples of North America archive. This is a proprietary site. In other words, the library has to pay to have it available. The Library of Congress does subscribe to the site, and you can access it through the Electronic Resources portal on computer terminals in the Manuscript Division reading room or elsewhere within the library, but you can't get to it from off-site. There are a variety of Native American history materials among what we call in the Manuscript Division our miscellaneous manuscript collections. These are very small collections we store on site in the Madison building, and some of them are also available on microfilm. Examples include the Assiniboine or Stony First Nation and Dakota Sioux Indian collection. It contains only 4 items, but these include a vocabulary list with English equivalents and a translation of the Lord's Prayer collected from a First Nation speaker in Canada in 1886. Both the Albert Gallatin and the Indian Languages Miscellaneous Manuscript collections focus primarily on Indian tribes of Mexico and Central America, while the John Kirk Townsend collection has glossaries of Indian words and recorded by an Anglo-American ornithologist during exploration of the Pacific Northwest in 1835. The Charles Leland papers within the Pennell Whistler papers include fieldwork for Leland's 1884 book, Algonquin Legends of New England, primarily Wabanaki, Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, and Micmac. Leland was the uncle of Elizabeth Robbins Pennell, and his materials came to the library as part of her papers. They include vocabularies collected by folklorist Abby Alger, who was author of work on Algonquin languages of Quebec and northern New England, and by a Passamaquoddy ethnologist and Native American member of the Maine state legislature, Louis Mitchell, who lived from 1847 to 1930. The division's Work Progress Administration Federal Writers Program and Schoolcraft collections also include documentation of Indian pageants, tales, and legends. Alger's published works are available electronically through the Hathi Trust, and you can access the Hathi Trust links through the online catalog records for particular collections. The papers of ethnologist C. Hart Merriam are our most important source for Indian languages of the Pacific Coast region. Merriam, who lived from 1855 to 1942, began his career as a naturalist and zoologist. He was one of the participants in the 1889 Harriman expedition to Alaska, and we also have the Harriman papers here at the library. In the latter part of his life, Merriam devoted his efforts to fieldwork studies of Indian peoples of California and Nevada. His vocabulary fieldwork was an extension of his work with the United States Department of Agriculture, with backing from the Harriman Fund of the Smithsonian in 1910. The vocabulary checklists and word and phrase fieldwork records in the Merriam collection stem primarily from 1904 to 1938. Additional Merriam materials are at the Bancroft Library at the University of California at Berkeley. And ideally, if you're doing work on Merriam, you should work both at the Library of Congress and at the university in Berkeley. Merriam's California journals, which we have here at the library, are available on microfilm. Boxes 24 through 47 of the Manuscript Division's collection contain vocabulary fieldwork from throughout California, parts of Oregon and parts of Nevada, including word lists for Cho-mahs, Hupa, Miwok, and Pomo subgroups. The Merriam papers also includes handcrafted maps of the Indian linguistic groups of California. And for those of you who have already looked at the table, I've brought some of the physical vocabulary lists from California Indian groups, and also one of the map that you see on this screen here. We have several other maps that are in the oversized physical collection in the manuscript division, and if you come to do research, we can get those out for you. So that's it. Thanks very much.
And next up, we have Carla Davis Castro from the Law Library, and who's going to talk to us about the Indigenous Law Portal.
Good morning. Buenos dias. Thank you to the bringer of coffee. I hope it's helping to keep everybody awake. I know it's a lot to absorb. My name is Carla Davis Castro. I work at the Law Library, and I wanted to talk about the Indigenous Law Portal, which is a totally online source, so there's nothing more to look up other than what you find here. There are some things that we've digitized here, but actually a lot of them are in better condition digitized than they are physically, and so seeing it online is sometimes better than seeing it in person, just because of how you can zoom and such. So I want to talk a little bit about just sort of the basics of how librarians organize information. There's sort of two main systems or main tools. We use subject headings, which was mentioned earlier. Research is going to be under Indians of North America. These are the conversation about how that name came to be is one for another time. But for classification, a lot of what you would look at would be in Class E, which is History of the Americas. My colleague, Dr. Yolanda Goldberg, was interested in finding a place for Indigenous law because for most of the library's history and library history in the United States, all Indigenous things was grouped together under Class E, no matter what the subject was. And for her, this was problematic. She didn't think that Indigenous law should be next to basket weaving and pottery just because it was the same tribe. And so she has been working on a new classification system, K. Class K is where law lives. We have sort of Class K for Western law, and she is in the process of creating KI, which is Indigenous law of the Americas. North America is done. We're working on Central America. We will go into South America. So this is the first time that Indigenous law is being pulled out away from other cultural and anthropological type materials and putting it in a different area. So one area was this classification, which is to deal with print materials. When you have books that are published, things that come in and you say, where am I going to put this physical book on a shelf? But we know that there's a lot of information that doesn't go on a shelf. Some things that never will go on a shelf because they were born digital, as we say. So the idea of the Indigenous Law Portal was born to try to organize information that you see online that is never going to come into our bookshelf. So just to talk a little bit about library tools, the way classification works, we have number one, name authority records, and these are, library records that are created for people, organizations, places, and the way you create these authority records is based on research. Once you have these name authority records, you have lots of little pieces, like puzzle pieces, but the idea is to organize the information so that someone can find it in a logical way. So we have classification, which I was showing you earlier, Class E, History of the Americas, or of North America, and, for example, law. And so this classification is structured according to hierarchical relationships, right? So we have Indians of North America for the hemisphere, Indians of North America, Indians of Mexico and Central America, Indians of South America, and then within each subregion, right? So you move down the hierarchy. For a lot of classes like Class E, They're organized by subject. Law is divided by geography because law emanates from a jurisdiction, from a place, the law of this place. So in our case, law is organized by geography to reflect jurisdictions. So I was talking about these puzzle pieces, these name authority records. So here's one that was created. What has been interesting about this project is that there were a lot of tribes, there were a lot of councils, there were a lot of advocacy organizations that never had name authority records ever. And so part of this project has been creating name authority records to establish these entities as groups, as places, as governments within library systems. So we can create name authority records here at the Library of Congress, and then they also go into sort of a global name authority pool. So once this is created, for example, for the Shoshone-Bannock tribes of the Fort Hall Reservation of Idaho, once we've created it here, it will then go into a global pool, and this is something that libraries all over the world can access. For North America alone, we've created over 2,000 name authority records. These are peoples, governments that did not exist in the library world before. So as you can see here, we've got the name of the tribe, and then as you go down, we have alternate names. We know a history of names, complicated. People got called different things by different people at different times. So as much as possible, we try to have alternate names here to make each group more findable. And just where Indigenous law sits in sort of the overall thing, I mentioned Class K. K at the top is global. So here's the geographical hierarchy. Yes?
Is this federal Indian law, is it IRA based?
That's a really good question.
Is actual Indigenous law?
That's a good question. So under Class K, Western nation states law, we do have federal Indian law, but that's under Class K because federal Indian law emanates from Congress right across the street. That's not Indigenous. That's federal Indian law about Indigenous peoples, but not of them. So Indigenous law really is what comes out of the councils. How are Indigenous peoples governing themselves? And our focus is today. So not historically.
When I talk of IRA, Indian Reorganization Act, governments were forced on us, and that type of government is different than traditional government. So what laws are you putting on here? IRA governments laws? Are you putting traditional, very traditional laws? Because to me, they're two separate things.
Well, as much as we can find. So it's true that those governments were imposed especially around the 1920s, 30s, but a lot of those governments are still operational today. They have councils, they have websites, they've taken on some sort of agency. So we do include those because even though the seed of it maybe was, an act of Congress here, if they still live on today and they're making decisions and they have governments, then that at some point, 100 years later reflects the tribe's decisions. So for now, we do include those. As much as we can find other traditional materials, we do include them. The idea is that federal Indian law is not in KI. That's in K. It's not part of Indigenous law. So the acts of Congress are not on this side.
What about treaties?
So treaties we're working on. Creating the name authority records, like I said, this is something that we're working on. Right now, I think the focus has been on Canadian treaties. And so, yes, those are examples where technically they could live on both sides, right? They could live on the K side or the KI side. Normally, we try to put it in both and have a bridge saying, this represents sovereignty, autonomy of two different groups that came to sign a treaty. So yes, that would absolutely be part of Indigenous law. So we tried to be use terms that are reflective of national realities because the way people talk about Indigenous law and issues in Canada is different from the US and it's different from Mexico. I was brought on to do research for Central America, so now we're getting into terms in Spanish. This is just an example of similar structure for how you would find information, but the terms are slightly different. So this is what the homepage looks like for the Indigenous Law Portal. As I said, KI is geographic, so you find the group that you're looking for, you find the council that you're looking for through maps to move hierarchically. So we started with North America. As you might guess, here at the Library of Congress, the area that we're strongest in is for the United States. And the Library of Congress has digitized over 400 constitutions that were here. Like you had mentioned, a lot of those governments and a lot of the constitutions are coming out of the 20s and 30s, but not all of them. We have materials from Cherokee and the Chickasaw and the Choctaw that are mid-19th century. So it depends on the group. So when you move into the United States, you can search by state or you can search by region. So for example, if you went into the Southwest, you have here a list of your groups. Like I said, because this is jurisdiction and it's based on land, we're looking at where people are located. We do have groups to try to connect people. The Sioux group, for example, has several different reservations. There's many jurisdictions, and they have each a government. So we try to represent where people physically are, but we do try to make cultural connections between related groups. This is one example of a constitution out of 1936. I was interested in having a table to show that, but I was told that this was not printed on very good paper in the 1930s. It's not in really great shape, and it's actually much better to look at the digital form than the physical form. And this is what you were referring to about imposed governments. But this is what we have. If we get more, find more, see more, people want to share more, we would really like to be able to include that. So just a little bit about impact. I talked about the name authorities that we're creating to make sure that we have Indigenous people on the map. Digitized works from the Law Library of Congress, and we got a lot of people coming to see us. So you can see page visits, over 3,000 document downloads. People are downloading these digitized constitutions. It's really interesting to see, people are looking for these documents. They're looking for access. And it's one thing to read it because we have it digitized. You can look at the website anytime you want. But downloading it to me means you actually want to read it. You want to hold it. To me, the most interesting thing is that we've had users from 174 countries visit the Indigenous Law Portal. The United Nations has 193 member states. So there are people everywhere who want to see what they can find on Indigenous law. So like I said, it's open. We would love to have more. We're working on Central America. That's all for me. And I thought there was a schedule here. I'm not sure who the next person is. We will introduce ourselves. Okay, great. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Barbara Natanson. I'm the head of the Prints and Photographs Reading Room, and with my colleague Catherine Blood, who is our fine prints curator, we're excited to have an opportunity to talk to you about our collections. Our plan today is to talk to you about the pictorial collections in the library. If pictorial voices isn't a contradiction in terms, Catherine's going to highlight for you the variety of pictorial voices that you can see in the Prints and Photographs division. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about how to do some searching and how to use our collections. But first, I thought we would start with a little bit of context about the larger collectivity of materials that our Native American holdings live in. So the Prints and Photographs division, we estimate at this point, so everybody comes up and starts to talk about their millions of items, but we have nearly 16 million items in the collections. We're particularly strong for American culture and history, but as you can see from the Japanese print in the corner, we also have international collecting. We've gotten our materials from various sources. We've been in existence for a little bit more than a century. Since 1870, when the Copyright Office found its home in the Library of Congress, a lot of our collections between about that point and 1920 were built through copyright deposit. Can you hear me? So that meant that people were submitting their images to be protected, to register their rights to the images so that other people would not pirate them, because even back before Photoshop, pirating was a problem. And so it puts a certain commercial slant on the collections that we have. But we also have gotten materials through generous gifts, and we occasionally purchase materials. The largest portion of the collections is photographs, and we have photographs in a lot of different formats. So 19th century photographs like this cased photograph of an African-American family during the Civil War. We also have a wonderful collection of panoramic photographs which came to us through copyright deposit, and these are wonderful for getting a sense of landscapes all over the U.S. and sometimes towns and cities, and sometimes large groups, because if you are thinking about marketing your photographs and you take a picture with a large group, how many can you sell? One to each person in the group, right? Oops. And then we also have a large stereograph collection, also acquired through copyright deposit primarily. So these images where you've got two pictures mounted side by side, when you look through them through a special viewer, you get a 3D experience, a sort of you are there experience, so they can be really interesting to look at. Our photo collections are particularly documentary in nature, and especially one concentration is photojournalism. So you're seeing some samples on the left, on your left, yes, the sample from an early photojournalism collection from the 1910s. That was based in New York, but we are also collecting photojournalism up to the present day, so we have some collections that run into the 1980s and 90s. We also have lots of images in non-photographic formats, so just as you're seeing materials in all different formats from all over the library, the kinds of pictorial formats that we have are just as different one from another. So we have large poster collection, we have comic strips and cartoon drawings, we have sheet music covers, and of course we have fine prints, which makes it an appropriate time for me to turn this over to Catherine Blood. Oops.
So we're going to, is this okay? We're going to join Jay in plugging our Many Nations book. And it's worth mentioning that this is a book from 1996, and we've been actively, the library's been actively collecting all along the way. So it's a good launch point, but keep going further. And the images that we're bringing, which are both appearing in this book, are John Grable's 1891 view of a Sioux camp photographed not long after the massacre at Wounded Knee, and in the middle from our protest poster collection is a 1974 poster, We Remember Wounded Knee, by Bruce Carter. There's also an online collection overview, and you see the link at the top here, called Images of Indians of North America, and there's a collection finding aid on the same subject, which we have brought with us today, and you can find in our reading room anytime. So of the library's more than 17,000 images of Native American peoples and related subjects, the lion's share arrived through copyright deposit beginning in the 1870s. And of those, only a fraction were made by Indigenous creators. And so acquisition efforts in the last several decades especially have emphasized adding works in the first person, so first person visual voices by artists of American Indian heritage. And we'll look at some examples shortly. But in the historic collection, strengths tend to cluster along these categories that you see on the slide. And I won't read them. The book also echoes this arrangement, but I'll mention the images that are on the screen. There's a 1904 portrait of a Navajo woman by Edward Curtis, and a fairly rare example of a subject smiling. In his body of work, an 1899 Buffalo Bill Wild West show poster, which shows that these categories are not mutually exclusive and can overlap. A 1903 Francis Benjamin Johnston photograph of students at Pennsylvania's Carlisle Indian School. a group portrait of a Sioux Indian delegation to Washington in 1891, and McKinney and Hall's 1843 portrait of Cherokee Chief John Ross. In the arena of documentary photography, and we brought one of these with us today in the original over in the corner, I hope you get a chance to look at it up close and in person, are this early 20th century portrait of Blackfoot tribal leader Mountain Chief, and he's listening to a recording of a Blackfoot song made with ethnographer Frances Densmore, whose scrapbook is in the room as well. On the right is Zig Jackson's 1995 photo of Vietnam vets Howard and Leroy Crow Flies High escorting 3 war mothers, and this is part of his Tribal Veterans series. Now here are photographs by Richard Throssell, who was born to a Red River Métis family in Oregon and later he was adopted into the Crow Nation while working in Montana as an Indian service clerk. And his work is often compared with that of Edward Curtis, and the two met around 1905 and spent time together. And here are a few examples from the library's extensive Curtis collection of about 2,400 photos, including an oasis in the Badlands whose subject is identified as an Oglala warrior named Red Hawk. In his project called the Critical Indigenous Photographic Exchange, DNA photographer Will Wilson consciously embraces the documentary impulse of Curtis, but supplants it from the viewpoint of, in his own words, I have a quote from him, a 21st century indigenous trans-customary cultural practitioner. And there he is at the left with his camera. And Wilson further evokes, they're very beautiful, we have one on the table over there, the self-portrait is over there. Wilson further evokes Curtis through his use of historic photo processes and his studio portrait approach to his subjects who often look directly at the lens. So he's invited the participation of indigenous artists, tribal citizens, leaders, creators, curators, academics, and on the right is Sandra Lamouche, and she's a renowned hoop dancer and also a scholar. And she's a member of the Big Stone Cree Nation. So here on the left is another famous Curtis image showing Diné horse riders at Arizona's Canyon de Chelly. And on the right, the image is recast by Alaska-born artist Larry McNeil, who is a member of the Tlingit and Nisga'a nations. The title is Diacritical Formline Chilkat Style. We know that Curtis edited things like alarm clocks and umbrellas out of some of his images, but here McNeil playfully adds a group of people in an automobile that suits the period. And I have a quote from McNeil. He says, "I have fun with the American mythology, and in the spirit of Raven, our own Northwest Coast mythological being, change things around. I have an indigenous family out for a cruise, instead of the romanticized idea of noble savages riding their horses everywhere." And if you look closely, you can see him. In the lower left blue margin is the photographer with his camera strapped around his neck. So he's there, he's sort of inside but also outside the action as witness and commentator. Here's one of the earliest known European portrait prints of an American Indian from life, from 1645 by Bohemian artist Wenceslas Haller. It's tiny, it's about this big. And the title identifies him as an American from Virginia, and a recent scholar has tentatively identified the man as a Munsee, Delaware Algonquian-speaking warrior called Jack, and almost nothing else is known. Who was transported to Amsterdam from New Amsterdam in 1644, and almost nothing else is known. On the right is a recent acquisition, which we've also brought with us today, a 2011 monoprint by Osage artist Norman Akers, who was born and raised in Oklahoma and teaches at the University of Kansas. So underscoring images of migration and immigration, we see birds in flight and banknote portraits of 3 well-known U.S. founding fathers arriving in alien spaceships. They are Alexander Hamilton, Ulysses S. Grant, and George Washington, and they're all associated with government policies that would have devastating results for indigenous Americans. The conventionalized image, I interviewed him a little bit and asked about the very red Indian that appears on the left. And he was borrowed from an old Webster's dictionary for the entry that went along with the word tom-tom. So it's playful, but it has a punch. So these beautiful, vibrant screen prints are by Oklahoma Potawatomi artist, dancer, and musician Woody Crumbo. While studying art at Wichita University and the University of Oklahoma, Crumbo supported himself as a dancer while performing and collected tribal dances from across the country. And these came in through copyright deposit. Jean Quick-to-See Smith is a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Nation of Montana, and her 2014 lithograph called Waiting for Rain shows a central figure based on the right-hand 19th century portrait of a Mandan man by Swiss artist Karl Bodmer, and we have an impression of this, and Rare Book Division has a hand-colored impression of this as well. So surrounding him and Jean Quick-to-See Smith's images are signs of the natural world, and you can't see it very well, but tiny song lyrics that are from the song You Are My Sunshine, You Make Me Happy When Skies Are Gray, and on the left margin, it says, Listen up, humans. So she's doing something very different with this imagery, and she made the work, she's a gardener. She made the work during a period of severe drought, about 5 years. So she's commenting on environmental health and the fragility of the ecosystem. So before turning things back over to Barbara, I just want to give an idea. We've been looking at sort of narrative storytelling representational images. But our collection traverses a much wider universe of styles and subjects. So going clockwise from top left, some beautiful contemporary examples by Kay Walking Stick, Wendy Red Star, Edgar Heap of Birds, and Marie Watt. And this is just the tiniest tip of the iceberg, so we hope to see you to come and look and explore further. And now we'll hear from Barbara.
So how do you delve into the iceberg? That's the big question. Well, you've probably already discovered that there are a lot of search systems on the Library of Congress website, and we have a catalog that's devoted to the holdings of the Prints and Photographs Division that's called the Prints and Photographs Online Catalog. You'll see the URL at the top of this screen. We also have a handout at the back of the room. So before you leave today, do take a handout. Then you can pursue the mystery of which are the tips that I'm not telling you out loud today that you could pursue through the paper. At any rate, the Prints and Photographs Online Catalog, we estimate it covers about 95% of our holdings at some level, and the some level is the asterisk. We describe some things as entire groups, maybe because they're going to be better understood as groups, and also because describing 16 million items one by one could take a lot of time. We also have some items that are individually described, often things like the fine prints that Catherine was showing you. Of the 16 million items, we've digitized about 1.25 million images, so you will find lots of digitized images through the online catalog, but not by any means all. In terms of using the online catalog, you would have a slightly different experience if you're here on site at the library versus if you're searching from your home or your office or from the classrooms that you might be using this couple of weeks. So when you're on site here at the Library of Congress, we usually offer a small thumbnail, but we also offer a larger JPEG or two and a high-resolution TIFF file. When you're outside the Library of Congress, if we don't know that the rights are free for an image, we only display the thumbnail image. So to have the fullest experience, you'd want to be doing your searching online. But we've also tried to make it as efficient as possible for you to do your searching where it makes the most sense. So whenever you do a search, for instance, I did a search for Indians of North America. I got 4,531 records that use that phrase, but you see at the top that I could filter my results. So if I'm at home or I'm outside the library's buildings, I might filter to larger image available anywhere, because those are the digitized images that I'd be able to see the larger JPEG and TIFF and see all the detail that they offer, as well as download them. In the middle, you see larger image available only at the Library of Congress. Those are the ones that if you're planning a visit here, you may want to focus on those while you're here on site so that you can make most efficient use of your time. And likewise, you see that there are 259 listings for things that are not digitized at all. So again, you might want to focus on those while you're here on site. You are very welcome to come to our reading room to do research. We're in the Madison building across the street in room 337, so up on the 3rd floor. We're open Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5. We stop bringing things out of the storage areas at 4 p.m., so it's usually a good idea to get here well before that point. But as you can see in this picture, that we also have a lot of file cabinets on our reading room, so even if you were to get here close to 4, there may be some material that we can show you right out in the reading room. We have lockers right in our foyer, so you don't need to worry about locking up your belongings in the cloakroom. Just bring them with you and we'll help you get them stowed away, and then you'll have easy access to them while you're in our reading room, where we allow very few things in general just to protect the materials. So things to remember to bring if you come to make a visit: bring your LC reader card. We'll do a little registration activity up at our front desk and do some orientation. It's a good idea also to bring a camera. Many of our pictures are too old or fragile to go on a photocopy machine, so the best way to take a record of what you saw is to take a point-and-shoot photo without flash. Because you may want to download images that are not displaying for you outside the Library of Congress buildings, it's also a good idea to bring a flash drive or a laptop onto which you can download the images. And then, of course, your curiosity is always a good thing to come armed with. So for the most part, you don't need to make an advance appointment to use our collections. Many things are available just on demand. Often, if it's something in our storage areas, we help you fill out a paper call slip. We go and fetch it, and it's available to you within about 10 to 15 minutes. There are some occasions, however, where material is either off-site and we need time to bring it on-site, or it's so fragile that we need to have a staff member available to work with you one-on-one. So one thing to watch out for is an access advisory, because that's a situation in which it would be a good idea to get in touch with us in advance, just so that we can make sure that we have the material available for you to look at. By means of contacting us, whether or not you need to make an appointment or you just want to know what we might have, we're really happy to consult with you. We do answer our phone between 8:30 and 5. So if you phone us, just press 3 when you get to the phone tree, and a reference person will pick up to talk with you. We also do Ask a Librarian, as Jay was mentioning. So when you're within the Prints and Photographs online catalog, the way to find our Ask a Librarian page most directly is to look to the left where it says Ask a Prints and Photographs Librarian. That way you don't have to be steered to us through all the other librarians who are monitoring Ask a Librarian here at the library. And when you select that, you will get to our Ask a Librarian page, where you can either go ahead and fill out the online form to ask us your question, or go ahead and phone us. If it's not something that we can answer in real time, then we'll at least direct you to the Ask a Librarian page and tell you the things that would be most important for us to know, so that we can research your question further. And with that, we'll hope that you can make a visit, and I think we're turning it over to Judith Gray.
I join with everybody in saying welcome to those of you who have never been here before, and I'm pleased to see some people whom I have met here before, so welcome back. We've mentioned Edward Curtis multiple times here, so I just wanted to say, for those who are interested, he also made sound recordings, but they are one of the things that are not here. The Edward Curtis recordings are at the Archives of Traditional Music at Indiana University. So if anybody is looking for that part of the picture, or hear the sound of that picture, you'll need to go to Indiana. So I want to tell you just a little bit about our holdings. The American Folklife Center, the archive of the American Folklife Center, has probably the largest collection of one-of-a-kind ethnographic recordings of tribal music, somewhere on the order of, and I'm saying music, and I'll explain why, probably over 2,000 hours at least, from at least 140 different tribes and many more communities than that, since a lot of collections were recorded in multiple locations. So there's a lot of material here, but it is certainly not uniform in terms of where it comes from, nor is it uniform in the kinds of material, the kinds of sound recordings that you'll find here. Nonetheless, I think quite a few of you will find your way back to us in the course of the next week, and I look forward to that. The recordings that came to us come from various places. We did end up with most of the Bureau of American Ethnology cylinder recordings in particular. Our recordings go back to 1890. You heard Betsy Peterson make mention of those Passamaquoddy recordings when she started the morning for us. But we have recordings all the way up to at least last year when we had performers here, and when people perform here, we also try to interview them about their cultural heritage and such, and so we have those materials become part of the collections as well. The people who are out doing the early recordings, though, were principally linguists, ethnologists, early ethnomusicologists, folklorists, and occasional tourists and such. But you're very lucky. I thought when the sound came that it was going to be the evacuation of this building. We haven't had our spring fire drill yet, so oh, let it go. Let's see. Anyway, be prepared. So the people who are out making those early recordings, almost all of them were prepared to deal with International Phonetic Alphabet. So narratives, spoken word, almost exclusively taken down by hand, by dictation, and you'll have to be at whatever location has those written manuscripts. In a lot of cases, for the ones collected for the Bureau of American Ethnology, you're going to be looking at documents at the National Anthropological Archives. I think you have gone there or you're going there, right? Mostly then, the early sound recordings tend to be the wax cylinders that were recorded between roughly 1890 and 1930. Most of the early ones only would take about 2 minutes of material. Sometimes they could stretch them by playing very, very slowly. They could get a little bit more material on, but you're still only looking at small amounts of audio. And so for that reason, that was part of the reason that the narratives, the much longer narratives were taken down by dictation, and the cylinders themselves were reserved for songs. So the bulk of the audio recordings that you're going to get here are going to be songs rather than spoken word. And that means when you're trying to extract words and such, you're dealing with a lot of repertory that might be mostly vocables, and you're going to deal with the fact that, when you sing a word, you might pronounce it slightly differently than when you speak it. You might accent it slightly differently depending upon the melody. So you're going to have to be working through those things and keep those factors in mind. Another thing about the collections, you're always dependent then on what the goal was of the person who was out making the recordings. And while some of them were focused on more general materials, one of the major collectors, for example, Frances Densmore, her goal was specifically to get the oldest ceremonial traditions that she could. So that meant she did not go to women, she did not collect work songs, she did not collect lullabies. She would be, wherever she could, approaching the oldest men, usually, who were the ceremonial leaders. And so you end up getting recordings of only certain kinds of genres. In the case of, if she was recording really old men in some communities, their voices quavered. So the question then becomes, is the quaver simply an older voice, or is it part of the stylistic trait of that particular song genre? Again, something that those of you who are in the communities hopefully will recognize and be able to sort out that which is relevant to what you're doing.
How did she come to the conclusion that old men are the most?
That's what she was finding as she went out. As she started her collecting, she was constantly being directed to the older men. And then I think after a while that became more her focus, so that she wasn't questioning that, she was just following that particular trend. She started her collecting career when she was 40 years old and kept collecting until she was 87. Her story is another one of, well, all of these collections are filled with stories. And sometimes the stories are all in one place that you can find, but in a lot of cases, for example, the recordings came here, the documentation that may have been created at the same time is in another institution, correspondence that the collector had with either with people who sang for him or with the sponsoring organization, that may be in a third place entirely. We've tried to gather what we can so that we're trying to provide you as full a picture as we can of what's out there. So but that does mean we've got a lot of photocopies from other places, and we may not have picked up absolutely everything there. So if you're really pursuing one specific collection, you may find yourself going to multiple institutions in multiple states, or even multiple countries in some cases. The other part to say is that because of this, the way collecting was done, especially early on, the focus was really on the parts of the country, parts of the U.S., where it was believed that native cultures were more intact. So you end up getting far more interest and far more recordings from the American Southwest. East of the Mississippi, you're pretty much going to get Iroquois. You might get a few things around the Great Lakes. You're going to get a few Cherokee recordings from North Carolina and a few Seminole recordings from Florida. You're not going to get much else. So there's, in some cases we have collections that are about 2 minutes of material. On the other hand, we've got at least one Pueblo collection that's over 400 hours. So it's, for that reason, I do want to tell you, for the groups that are represented in this year's Breath of Life, I can tell you which groups have some material here, because some of you will not be seeing us, I expect. We do have the Cho-mahs recordings, so that will be for those of you doing some of the Barbareño, Obispeño, and Ventureño work. We do have some Haida materials, some Hupa materials, Miwok. For Nisenan, the closest that we have are 2 Concow collections. So if that turns out to be relevant, that would be the material we would have. We do have quite a bit of Nez Perce, some Oto, Paiute, although this is one instance where the collectors don't necessarily tell you exactly which Paiute group. So you're going to have to look and see what the documentation says and see if you can determine whether it's relevant to your specific community or not. Likewise, Pomo, oh yes, that's a real mix in what we have listed here. Ponca, and Ponca is the last of the groups. Okay. One of the things to be said, since many of you are groups from California, a lot of what we have is samples that are drawn from elsewhere. And so, especially from the Hearst Museum at Berkeley. What we end up, for example, the Pomo recordings, most of them are going to be samplers of larger collections that are out there. So you're welcome to listen to the materials that we have here, but of course, their collections are larger, and chances are they've got much more documentation than ever made its way here. So when you're deciding whether or not to come back and to do some listening with us, you'll need to weigh that. And I will give one set of these pages to Gabriella to take so that you can look at it ahead of time and see whether it's worthwhile, and if so, for you to come. We will need to have you make listening appointments just so we can have the materials queued up for you. It'll be streaming audio in listening cubes in the reading room or sometimes in the conference room if it's a larger group. and then we'll see how best we can accommodate you and bring out whatever materials we have that are relevant. Over on the table over there, I brought out some of the originals, some of the field notes from Willard Rhodes, some of Alice Fletcher's, the notes that were inside the Otto cylinder boxes, and some of the Helen Roberts field notes and such. Chances are, again, as you've heard from other reading rooms, if we've got a surrogate copy, we'll use that so that you don't have to worry as much about, something getting damaged or whatever. I do also want to say at the end of this, one other thing. You've heard from several reading rooms. You haven't heard from all of the reading rooms here in the library. And the fact is that there's going to be material related to tribal groups in probably every single reading room. And so you can think more broadly. I mean, the library also has the largest, well, you've seen some maps, but the library's Geography and Maps division is enormous. And if you are interested in seeing if there are maps documenting the territory of your community, that might be a useful thing for you to do. I even noticed on one of the things that Jay showed you about one of the searches, the Cho-mahs searches, one of the titles for a bilingual document was actually for something that's in children's lit. So even there, in children's literature, you may find things that that would have samples of language that could be relevant. So, as all have said, talk with all of us who do reference, and we'll try to get you to different parts of the library that might have useful things. Mm-hmm.
With regard to the audio recordings that are copies of or samples from maybe the original at another institution, are those samples that have been created relatively recently, or is it actually possible that copies that are here might be better quality than ones like back in Berkeley that the anthropologists in Berkeley were playing them over and over and over, and maybe you have a better copy here?
That would be, my guess would be not, because I think the samples were sent by what was formerly the Lowy Museum before it became the Hearst Museum. The Lowy sent samples probably in the 70s to see.
When they were transferred to magnetic tape?
Yeah, I think they sent just samples to see what our copies would then look like, but then went those, the originals went back, and then they made their own copies later on at some point. So my hunch is that for a lot of the materials, it's probably going to be that we have actually a generation lower than the ones they have. So then the question becomes, what was the equipment that was used for transferring at which point? But that's another. Yeah.
If it was done, if there were two copies of a cylinder that were, one the original and one someplace else, but
yeah. There's all sorts of interesting stuff happening with cylinders, but it's all going to take a lot of time at this point. It can take several hours to do a retransfer and then to do the processing before you get one cylinder of 2 or 3 minutes. So it's happening, and there's some exciting possibilities, but it will be.
What is the status with Eileen or Irene? Are you using Irene here, that laser reading?
We've done the 3D Irene. You need a 3D reader as opposed to a two-dimensional one that reads discs. The 3D one is working somewhat. I know that it's been being used. Actually, I think the Ishi recordings out that Krober made, I think those have been done out in California. We have a few samples, but we have been using. There are at least 2 other transfer mechanisms that we've been using that are a little bit faster, and we'll see how that all goes. But yeah, we're using Irene for some things. We have real hopes that Irene can restore some at least broken cylinders that are not shattered, but broken. And we'll see how that all goes. So, Anyway, I think we're getting to the time when you have to be heading back, and so you're pointing to the what? Yes, I was looking for you.
I just wanted to do two things. The first is, of course, to acknowledge and thank our colleagues at the Library of Congress. So you heard from Betsy, from Jay, from two Barbaras, from Carla, from Catherine, from Judith, from Guha. Thea was gracious enough to get us in and out, even with unexpected coffee. There was John also helping out. And there's a number of people who I haven't met, but who are here, and I know I don't have their names. So we're talking a dozen people who are coming together and giving us their time for the next 2 weeks. And so I wanted to bring that back to a point that I made in my opening remarks on Monday, and that is that there's many of us holding the pieces, building that bulletproof spider web to hold all of these efforts to sustain linguistic diversity. Hold on to that net. You're not alone. We're all together here. So appointments first, and we'll get the bus thing going. And thank you again to our Library of Congress colleagues.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.